Imagine a quiet town, nestled in the heart of rural America, where life drifts along gently, undisturbed by the chaos of the outside world. A place where neighbors know each other's names, the seasons mark the passage of time, and nights are filled with the soft hum of crickets and the occasional call of a distant owl. But then, one day in the late 1960s, a strange broadcast interrupted the peace. It lasted only 6 minutes. 6 minutes that no one ever forgot. What happened in those 6 minutes would unravel the very fabric of that town's sanity, driving its residents to hysteria, hallucinations, and in some cases, madness so profound it cost lives. The broadcast was recorded on tape, yet the original has since vanished. The frequency it aired on, officially erased from all records, and the town itself, slowly erased from public memory, swallowed by rumors and silence. This is the story of the broadcast that drove an entire town insane. In 1963, a small rural town called Millbrook, name changed to protect its identity, had a modest population of about 1,500 people. The town was the kind of place you'd pass by on a highway without noticing, the kind of place where everyone went to the same school, the same church, and the same diner. It had no crime waves, no unusual events, until that fateful day. Local radio stations routinely transmitted music, news, and community announcements. But on the night of October 13th, at exactly 10:03 p.m., the normal broadcast was interrupted. For 6 minutes, instead of the usual music, a low, distorted signal filled the airwaves. The transmission was unlike anything anyone had heard. A mixture of haunting tones, strange rhythmic pulses, and whispers barely audible beneath the static. Some listeners described hearing fragments of voices speaking in unknown languages or phrases that felt like curses. Others claimed to hear strange animal sounds, shrieks, growls, and clicks that made their skin crawl. The broadcast ended abruptly at 10:09 p.m., and the regular programming resumed as if nothing had happened. Almost immediately, strange things began happening in Millbrook. Residents who heard the broadcast reported intense headaches, dizziness, and a feeling of overwhelming dread. A few claimed vivid nightmares that night, filled with shadowy figures and labyrinthine corridors. One woman, Mrs. Evelyn Harper, told a local reporter, "It was like something crawled into my mind and wouldn't let go. I dreamt I was lost in a forest of voices, and every time I tried to scream, my mouth was full of static." Within days, reports of unusual behavior surfaced. Children who were normally calm became agitated and frightened without cause. Adults reported hearing whispers in empty rooms. A local farmer found strange symbols etched into his barn door that appeared overnight, glowing faintly under moonlight. The local authorities were baffled, but attributed the phenomena to mass hysteria, a collective response to an unknown stressor. But the effects were real, and in some cases, severe. Radio station KMLB, the local broadcaster, had a tape recording of the night's programming for archival purposes. However, when station managers tried to review the October 13th broadcast weeks later, the tape with the strange transmission was missing. A replacement tape showed only the regular music and announcements, as if the eerie broadcast had never aired. Rumors spread among the station staff that the broadcast was a test of a classified government frequency, or worse, a failed experiment in psychological warfare. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, was said to have investigated quietly, but released no public statements. Decades later, A copy of a recording surfaced on a grainy cassette tape, passed down by an anonymous source claiming to be a former engineer at KMLB. The tape's content matched the strange 6-minute broadcast, haunting tones, whispers, and unsettling rhythms that seemed to pierce the mind. What exactly was that broadcast? Was it a secret weapon? An alien transmission? Or a broadcast of a forgotten ritual designed to manipulate human consciousness? Some researchers suggest it was an early experiment in infrasound, sound waves below the range of human hearing that can cause anxiety, nausea, and hallucinations. Others speculate it was an attempt to disrupt or control the minds of the population during the height of Cold War paranoia. Yet others believe it was a genuine paranormal event. A tear between dimensions, a message from entities beyond our understanding, or a cursed frequency accidentally picked up by terrestrial radio. Whatever the truth, the broadcast left an indelible mark on Millbrook. People moved away. The town faded from maps. Silence replaced the static. Millbrook stands empty today, a ghost town slowly reclaimed by nature. The buildings crumble, the streets grow wild, and the radio towers lie silent. Yet, on certain nights, locals swear they hear a faint static on the old radio frequencies, a whisper carried on the wind. The recording on that cassette tape has since been analyzed by sound experts and paranormal investigators alike. Some claim listening to it causes nausea, headaches, and anxiety, an echo of the original broadcast's effect. If you ever come across a recording of that broadcast, consider this a warning. Listen at your own risk. The town story is a chilling reminder of how fragile the human mind really is, and how some frequencies are best left unheard. Next time, we'll dive deeper into the mysterious history of Millbrook, the people who lived through the madness, and the strange symbols that appeared after the broadcast. Until then, keep your radios off, or at least beware what's hiding in the static. By the time investigators arrived in Millbrook in early November of 1963, most of the town's residents were either too frightened to speak or already gone. What had once been a modest, peaceful farming community now resembled the aftermath of a psychological disaster. Homes were abandoned mid-meal, windows boarded up with handwritten warnings carved into the wood. Phrases like, "Don't listen," "It follows you," and "Voices are real." At first glance, it looked like paranoia, but once you began asking questions, the answers stopped making sense. The official report filed by state health officials listed the incident as mass psychogenic illness, a polite term for collective hysteria. But several pages of the report were redacted, and the original copies were pulled from public records less than a year later. The locals still talk, quietly, and only when they trust you. One former resident, who asked to be referred to only as Ruth, gave an interview in 1997. Her family left the town just days after the broadcast, and to this day, she refuses to turn on a radio in her home. "I was only 8, she said, "but I remember the screaming from our neighbor's house. I remember my mother standing still in the kitchen for hours, just staring at the wall like she wasn't even in her body. And I remember the sound that came from the old kitchen radio, like wind inside a tunnel, but layered with something deeper. Not words, not music. It felt alive. The most disturbing part, according to Ruth, wasn't what they heard. It was what happened after. 3 days after the broadcast, Father William Harmon, the town's only priest, locked himself inside the church and rang the bell continuously for 24 hours. When townspeople finally forced their way inside, they found him collapsed at the altar, whispering a phrase in a language no one recognized. He died before he could be questioned. His final sermon, written the morning after the broadcast, was found torn into pieces, but one line remained intact. If you hear the voice, don't follow. It doesn't lead to light. It leads back to itself. Some interpreted this as biblical metaphor. Others weren't so sure. Linguists who later examined Father Harmon's final words on tape noted phonetic similarities to ancient Enochian, the so-called angelic language once claimed to be used by occultists in the 16th century. But the structure didn't match. It was as if the language was being generated in real time, adaptive, fluid, unfinished. Residents who didn't flee Millbrook started showing more unusual symptoms in the weeks that followed. Some complained that their shadows moved wrong. Others became unable to sleep, plagued by what one survivor described as dreams made of sound, not images. Medical professionals were flown in from out of state, but many refused to stay more than one night. A doctor from Chicago, in a memo later leaked to the press, wrote, "There's something here, not in the air, not in the water. Something that sits in the silence. You don't feel it until you stop talking." One by one, the professionals stopped returning calls. Their notes were sealed by the Department of Public Health. Whatever they encountered, it was not shared with the public. At the heart of the mystery was the broadcast itself, or rather, what it left behind. Strange patterns began appearing around town, not just the symbols scratched into doors or trees, but intricate formations burned into grass, like geometric crop circles on a smaller scale. They appeared overnight and seemed to follow no pattern, until someone overlaid them on a map. The formations traced a spiral, not a perfect one, but close. At the center, the town's old radio tower. It was shut down weeks after the incident, dismantled by men in unmarked trucks wearing suits and protective gloves. According to one resident who watched from a distance, the workers avoided touching the control board directly. One of them vomited at the base of the tower. No one spoke. Within 3 hours, the entire site was gone, but the signal wasn't. In 1986, nearly 23 years later, a ham radio enthusiast in New Mexico claimed to pick up a strange transmission at 2:11 a.m. It was brief, less than 30 seconds, but matched the frequencies and waveform analysis of the original Millbrook recording. The same pulses, the same humming undertone, the same echo of whispers, impossible to trace. He suffered a seizure during playback. When he recovered, he claimed to have seen a tower in a place with no sky, where radios speak even when they're off. His claims were dismissed by authorities, but the tape he made still circulates among paranormal investigators. And the audio, it's identical, right down to a single whisper near the end of the signal. A voice that, when slowed down and cleaned up, seems to say, "We're still listening. To this day, no official explanation has ever been given. No government department has claimed responsibility. No public records link the broadcast to any known transmission tests. And the town of Millbrook remains a black hole in the archives. A town without a history. But traces remain, in recordings, in dreams, in static that creeps into quiet rooms long after midnight. Next time, we'll examine the only known surviving copy of the broadcast, the cassette tape that resurfaced in 1995. And what researchers discovered when they played it backwards. You may think you know what you're hearing. You don't. In 1995, a worn, unmarked cassette tape was mailed anonymously to a small paranormal research group based in Portland, Oregon. The only thing written on the envelope was a single word: Millbrook. No return address, no note inside, just the tape. At first, the team thought it was a prank, the kind of thing they received all the time. But when they played it, something felt wrong. Not scary, just off. The audio began with silence, followed by a low rumble that seemed to shift from speaker to speaker like it was moving. Then came the sound. A slow, rhythmic thumping, like an artificial heartbeat, underlined by a sharp, static hiss. And then, the voices. They weren't speaking English, at least not clearly. It was a mixture of phonetic fragments, hissing syllables, and guttural sounds layered beneath each other. One researcher described it as a language trying to speak itself into existence. Another had a panic attack after just 40 seconds of listening. He described seeing a hallway that folded in on itself like a Mobius strip of rooms. That's when they knew. It matched the lost transmission from Millbrook. The tape was immediately sent to an independent audio forensics lab in San Francisco. The analysis confirmed some chilling things. First, the structure of the signal wasn't random. It followed a mathematical rhythm. Every 23.7 seconds, there was a soft chime buried in the static. And at exactly the 4-minute mark, a deep frequency pulsed in a pattern that, when graphed, formed a near-perfect spiral. The second discovery was even stranger. When the tape was played backward, a second layer of the broadcast emerged. A reverse signal that hadn't been audible before. It was quieter, like a whisper beneath the main audio. But after digital enhancement, a word could be clearly heard, repeated 3 times. Home, home, home. That word was no coincidence. Investigators looking into the original Millbrook incident found that several residents, in their final days before fleeing or dying, had scrawled the word home across mirrors, windows, and walls, sometimes in chalk, sometimes in blood. One police report documented a teenage boy who carved the word into his own chest during a sleepwalking episode. He survived, but never spoke again. A therapist who worked with him described his drawings as not of places, but of directions, like he was trying to map a location he couldn't remember, but felt. This is where the story begins to twist in on itself. The Portland group, against all warnings, decided to conduct an experiment. They created an isolated sound chamber and played the tape on loop for 24 hours straight. Volunteers, all carefully screened and psychologically stable, were allowed to listen in controlled intervals. Within 3 hours, 2 of the subjects began to exhibit strange symptoms: disassociation, partial memory loss, and a recurring visual hallucination. A tall black tower with no doors, standing in a featureless plane of static. Every person described it the same way. One even drew it. The drawing showed a structure almost identical to the old Millbrook radio tower, but exaggerated, impossibly tall, vanishing into the sky. Surrounding it were faint shapes, humanoid figures with no eyes, no mouths, and elongated limbs. Observers. Listeners. When asked why he drew it, the volunteer replied, "Because that's where the sound lives." After the experiment, the group ceased all research. The tape was locked away in a lead-lined box, and no one admitted to listening to it again. The group disbanded the following year. One of its founders went missing in 1997. The last known words she wrote were scrawled in the margins of a research log. They don't speak to us. They speak through us. The implications became clear to some researchers. The Millbrook signal wasn't just sound. It was a transmission designed to root itself inside the human mind. A kind of signal parasite that doesn't need to be understood to cause damage. It only needs to be heard. And once you hear it, you change. The strangest discovery came not from audio engineers, but from a linguist who studied ancient languages and dead dialects. She analyzed the backward message on the tape and claimed it wasn't saying home at all. It was an ancient Sumerian phrase, phonetically twisted by static and distortion. Its rough translation: it remembers where you are. When she published her findings online, her article was removed within 24 hours. Her university denied she had ever worked there. But backups of her paper still exist in small internet archives. One version includes a handwritten note in the margin: "This is not a language. This is a location." And that brings us back to Millbrook. The broadcast didn't just disrupt lives. It may have marked the people who heard it, left something inside them, like a frequency you can't unhear once it's part of you. The last known resident to remain in the town, a man in his 80s, known only as Eli, refused to leave, even when government agents tried to relocate him. When interviewed in 2004, he sat in his crumbling house surrounded by broken radios. When asked why he stayed, he said, "I'm not afraid of it anymore. It knows I listened, so now it listens back." The interview ended abruptly when Eli began to hum a low tone, perfectly matching the first pulse of the Millbrook signal. The camera equipment glitched for 12 full seconds. The footage was never aired. Next time, we'll explore the forgotten file labeled Operation Rainveil and its terrifying link to an early military experiment. One that suggests the Millbrook broadcast may not have been an accident after all. In 1971, nearly a decade after the Millbrook incident, a document surfaced during a declassified information leak. It was labeled only as Operation Rainveil, a name that meant nothing to the public, but struck immediate fear into the handful of researchers who had spent years trying to understand what happened in Millbrook. The file was brief, less than 5 pages. Most of it was redacted. But what it revealed was this: the broadcast that aired in Millbrook on October 13, 1963, may have been the result of a deliberate signal test, an experiment in what was then called auditory imprinting, a crude early attempt at what we might now refer to as sonic programming. The intended targets? Not enemies, but civilians. The goal wasn't to control them. It was to see what would remain after you broke the mind. Operation Rainveil, according to the document, was based on research developed during World War II and carried out in secret under the guise of radio testing. What happened in Millbrook, the file implied, was a Tier 3 uncontrolled outcome. Translation: the signal reached too far and did something no one could reverse. But that was only the beginning. The file also made a single, chilling reference to a source tower, a transmission array not listed on any public infrastructure maps. Coordinates were blacked out. But satellite images taken between 1962 and 1964 show an unusual structure just 3 miles north of Millbrook, a steel lattice with no identification markings and no power lines running in or out. When investigators returned to the location in the 1990s, they found nothing but a circular depression in the earth, filled with dead grass and rusted bolts embedded in the soil. But audio readings taken from the spot revealed an unexplained electromagnetic pulse, still active, still humming, as if something beneath the ground had never stopped broadcasting. And if you listen closely, There was a pattern. Every 6 minutes and 6 seconds, the pulse changed tone. Subtle, but exact. A rhythm, a reminder. This part of the story has been difficult to verify. The few remaining sources who worked on Operation Rainveil have either disappeared or died under strange circumstances. One was found drowned in his own bathtub, headphones still on, playing a continuous loop of white noise. Another suffered a breakdown in a hospital waiting room, repeating one phrase over and over. The sound opened something. It let it in. But despite the fear, researchers continued digging. And here's where I want to pause for a moment and speak directly to you, the listener. If you've made it this far, you're part of a small group of people willing to follow this mystery deep into the static. This isn't just a scary story. It's a puzzle scattered across time, across documents, across forgotten frequencies. And we need more people like you who want to uncover the truth. So if this story has caught your attention, leave a comment. Tell us what you think happened in Millbrook, or tell us if you've ever heard anything strange on the radio. And if you want to keep going down this rabbit hole with us, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because in the next episode, we're getting closer to something most people aren't supposed to know. Back to the signal. In 2003, a man named Marcus Bell, a shortwave radio collector and retired Navy technician, discovered a strange correlation between the Millbrook frequency and a defunct naval transmission pattern once used to communicate with submerged submarines. The frequency bands overlapped. This meant that the signal from Millbrook was strong enough, or specific enough, to reach deep beneath the ocean. Why does that matter? Because during that same week in 1963, a classified Navy sub on patrol in the Atlantic logged a bizarre anomaly. Crew members reported hearing an external tone vibrating through the hull. Instruments malfunctioned. One sailor suffered a psychotic episode and had to be restrained. His final words were, "The tower is calling the water." This is one of several strange connections between the Millbrook event and other incidents across the globe. Hints that the broadcast may not have been a single transmission, but part of a network, something bigger and older than modern radio. There's one final clue in the Operation Rainveil file. A phrase written in the margin by hand, almost like a warning. The signal adapts to the listener. What does that mean? Some believe the frequency changes based on who hears it, that it's not just a sound, but a mirror, echoing back whatever your subconscious fears most. That would explain why hallucinations varied, why dreams took different shapes, why some people broke and others vanished. But that would also suggest something worse, that the signal is still listening. There are stories from nearby towns, places that never reported a broadcast, but where residents claim to hear voices through baby monitors, through fans, through old tape decks left too close to the wall. The same pulse, the same whispers, always at night, always just before sleep. Next time, we'll explore one of those towns and a forgotten police dispatch from 1979 that was never meant to be heard outside government walls. But someone leaked the tape, and once you hear it, it never quite leaves your head. The tape was labeled only with a date, July 2nd, 1979. It was never supposed to leave the archive, never meant to be heard by anyone outside of a secure channel. But it leaked, quietly, passed between hands, copied and recopied until the original hissed with age and decay. And yet, the contents were unmistakable. It begins like a routine police dispatch from a small town roughly 50 miles west of Millbrook. The first 2 minutes are standard traffic. A report of a downed power line, a noise complaint. Then, suddenly, the voice on the line changes. Officer 12A, male, mid-30s by voice, breaks protocol. "There's something wrong with the sky," he says. The dispatcher pauses, then asks him to repeat. But the officer isn't answering anymore. There's only silence, followed by a sound in the background. A low, almost electronic hum, like a generator grinding against itself. Then the officer whispers, "It's the same sound. I remember it, from when I was a kid." He begins describing a tower that isn't there. Says it's taller than the clouds, that it's leaking noise into the air. He says he can see people standing at the base of it, people with no faces, just radios for heads. The dispatcher, clearly unnerved, tells him to return to the station. The officer laughs and says, "I can't leave. My boots are full of static." Then the tape ends. Cut off, no follow-up, no call sign, no confirmation. Just 6 minutes and 6 seconds of strange radio silence before the next dispatch resumes like nothing ever happened. When the tape surfaced online in the early 2000s, many dismissed it as a hoax. But a former audio technician with access to police radio records confirmed its authenticity. The officer's identity was never confirmed, but an internal memo listed one patrolman as medically retired the following week, for reasons described only as cognitive dissonance resulting in behavioral collapse. The detail no one could explain? He had no history of trauma, no mental illness. But he had been born in Millbrook, and his family had left the town just 2 days after the original 1963 broadcast. The implications became clearer with every new incident. The broadcast wasn't contained. It left echoes. Residue. It clung to people, followed them, maybe even used them to spread. Psychologists studying the so-called Millbrook syndrome began noting a pattern among those exposed to recordings of the original signal. First came the dreams. Long corridors, distant towers, broken radios. Then came the physical symptoms. Nosebleeds, ringing ears, sudden blackouts. And finally, in some rare cases, the voice. People who had never spoken a word of any ancient language. People with no linguistic training began muttering words in something unidentifiable. Not just sleep-talking, chanting, calling. One transcript from a 2006 case reads, "They are inside the signal, waiting for the sound that completes them." A patient who had never heard of Millbrook drew a spiral symbol over and over again in his medical journal. When a researcher asked him what it meant, he simply said, "It's the mouth of the signal." This is where modern researchers started getting scared, not just of the effects, but of the consistency, the language, the symbols, the hallucinations. People continents apart were reporting the same patterns. A shared vision, a sound they'd never consciously heard, but seemed to remember, as if the signal wasn't just broadcast into the air, but into the idea of listening itself. One scientist described it this way: "It's like the signal infected the concept of radio. Every time someone thinks about it, remembers it, listens for it, the transmission resumes." In 2015, a group of online investigators attempted to recreate the Millbrook frequency using sound synthesis software and old broadcast logs. They published the recreated audio on a hidden forum and invited volunteers to listen with headphones. Out of 73 listeners, 12 reported dizziness. 6 said they experienced lucid dreams featuring the tower. And 3 claimed something much stranger: After listening, they began hearing faint whispers coming from electronics that weren't even turned on. One user posted a video of a silent room. No speakers, no devices. Yet on the audio track, a voice can be faintly heard saying, "You've opened the door again." The file was removed hours later. The user deleted their account. No one has heard from them since. All of this raises one terrifying possibility. What if the Millbrook broadcast wasn't meant to be heard once? What if it's still broadcasting, not on any radio frequency, but through recordings, through memories, through curiosity? What if this story, this video, is part of the signal now? And if you've been watching since the beginning, have you noticed the patterns, the spirals, the repetition, the exact timing? Maybe they're just a part of the story, or maybe the story is part of something else. In the next part, we'll go further than anyone has dared. Into the recovered dream journals of patients who never knew Millbrook, but all described the same tower. We'll ask the question everyone else is too afraid to say out loud. What if the tower is real? And what if it's not waiting to be found, but waiting to be remembered? In 2017, a sealed box was discovered in the archives of a long-shuttered mental hospital in upstate New York. The building was being cleared for demolition when a construction worker stumbled across a locked storage room behind a collapsed wall. Inside, rows of dusty filing cabinets, water-damaged patient records, and one heavy wooden box labeled only with a red spiral. Inside were 27 dream journals, all handwritten, all belonging to patients from different decades, 1974 through 1992, none of whom had any connection to each other. But every one of them had been diagnosed with a rare dissociative disorder after claiming they saw a tower in their dreams. The doctors at the time believed the patients were simply feeding off each other's delusions. But a closer analysis would later reveal something impossible. Nearly identical descriptions of a place that never existed. Patient 004. The tower was black and humming. I couldn't move my legs, but I kept floating toward it. At the base was a door made of speakers. They were whispering something backwards. Patient 019. There was a circle of radios in the dirt around the tower, all playing static. And in the static, I could hear people I knew. My mother, my teacher, all of them saying the same word. Listen. Patient 021. It wasn't a dream. It was a broadcast I entered, like a room made of sound. I think I woke up still inside it. The phrases repeat across journals. Spiral symbols, silent figures, radios with no dials, a tower standing in a landscape with no sun or sky. Only gray, flickering light, as if the world itself was being tuned. And these weren't just similar themes. In some cases, identical sentences appeared across journals written years apart. Sentences like, "The static isn't random. It's a language being born." When these journals were analyzed by Dr. Helena Kresnik, a cognitive dream researcher from Berlin, she noticed another strange detail. The dates of the dreams clustered around specific time frames. October 1963, July 1979, February 1986, September 2003. All of those dates match known signal spike incidents reported by independent radio watchers. In other words, the dreams weren't random. They aligned with measurable electromagnetic anomalies in North America. And here's where the story gets darker. One of Dr. Kresnik's own research assistants began to experience recurring dreams after spending a week transcribing the journals. He described hearing numbers whispered in his sleep, numbers that, when plotted on a map, pointed to an abandoned broadcast relay station in northern Maine. They went there, and they found it. The station was completely inactive, rusted, falling apart. But inside, mounted on the wall, was a metal panel with dials that no longer moved. Scratched into the metal were the words, "It only needs one listener." In the main room, they found an old recording console, plugged in, but dead, until 3:03 a.m. That's when the lights flickered, and the meters began to twitch. No one touched anything. But the room began to fill with the low hum of a signal. Static, then a rising tone, so low it shook their teeth. And finally, only for 6 minutes, a faint, whispering voice. They didn't record it. The assistant fled the building. Dr. Krasnick stayed behind. She later wrote in her notes, "It didn't want to be found, but it wants to be remembered." Since then, researchers have begun to propose a chilling theory. The broadcast isn't a single event. It's a living signal, a phenomenon that feeds on attention, not by accident, but by design. Every time someone listens, remembers, dreams, it grows stronger. It doesn't need to reach a city or a continent. It just needs you. Because once you've heard it, even a piece of it, it changes the shape of your thoughts. You may forget the sound, but your mind remembers the pattern. One former patient who claimed to have heard the original 1963 signal said something that now seems disturbingly accurate. It's not a transmission. It's a door. So we ask again, what is the tower? Is it a place in the real world? A physical structure hidden or destroyed? Or is it a symbolic location that the human brain interprets the same way across different people? Some have suggested the signal itself is trying to manifest, using minds like relay stations, forcing them to construct a consistent inner space it can anchor to. The more people who listen, the more real the space becomes. The tower might not have always existed, but it might now. And perhaps the most terrifying possibility, we're helping it. Every time we speak of it, search for it, or remember it, we're amplifying it, broadcasting it forward. In the next part, we'll uncover the strange disappearance of 3 hikers who unknowingly followed the coordinates from the original Millbrook tape and never came back. But one of their cameras did, and on the final frame, a shadow shaped like a tower, with what looked like an antenna of bones. In the summer of 2009, 3 amateur urban explorers, Michael Rhodes, Dana Louis, and Tobias Klein, set out on a road trip through the northeastern U.S. to document abandoned Cold War-era radio towers. They were experienced hikers, well-equipped, and known in online communities for uploading eerie but artful footage of forgotten places. On July 18th, they followed a series of cryptic GPS coordinates posted anonymously on a message board related to the Millbrook incident. The post claimed the coordinates were taken from a spectral analysis of the original Millbrook tape. Numbers hidden in the signal, audible only when passed through a software filter used by submariners for decoding encrypted underwater comms. The 3 explorers were skeptical, but intrigued. They never returned. The last known contact was a photo Dana uploaded at 11:47 a.m. from a hiking trail in rural Vermont. A foggy tree line, overcast skies, and what looked like an old radio tower in the distance. The caption read, simply, "It's real." After that, silence. No more posts, no cell activity, no GPS pings. A search party was launched 4 days later. Their vehicle was found locked and parked beside an unmarked trailhead in a forest that wasn't even listed on local maps anymore. No path, no signs. Just trees, quiet, cold, and unusually still. Rescue teams found no trace of the hikers. But 12 days later, 53 miles away, a fisherman discovered something lodged in the rocks near a riverbank. A waterproof bag containing a cracked GoPro and a roll of undeveloped film. The footage would later change everything. The GoPro's battery was dead, but its SD card was intact. The video quality was rough, glitchy, and distorted, with long stretches of static. But the final recorded file, time-stamped 7:03 p.m., showed something unmistakable. Michael, panting heavily, turns the camera to his own face. He's terrified. "We found it," he says. "It's not a tower. It's like a spine coming out of the ground." The footage jerks violently as the camera pans. We see dark trees, impossibly tall, then a clearing. In the center, a massive structure, not made of metal, but of bones and wires, twisted together, rising at impossible angles. At the top, a cluster of shattered speakers, like mouths gaping open. A faint hum can be heard, the same low-frequency tone recorded on the Millbrook tape. Dana can be heard whispering, "It's in my head. I can hear it thinking." Then the footage cuts to black. The roll of film revealed only 5 photographs. 4 were blank, overexposed. But the last one showed a wide-angle shot of the structure, silhouetted against the night sky. A spiral of light arced behind it, as if the stars themselves were circling the tower. On the edge of the photo, barely visible, stood 3 human shapes, just watching. They weren't the hikers. Investigators who examined the footage reported feelings of nausea and vertigo. One lab technician developed temporary tinnitus. Another resigned without explanation after reviewing the spiral of light frame by frame, claiming it formed a pattern too consistent to be natural. A cryptographer hired to analyze the photo noted something even more disturbing. The angle of the spiral didn't match Earth's sky. It was tilted, like the stars were spinning from another axis entirely. His conclusion? The photo wasn't taken from here. A new theory emerged from this evidence, one darker than anything proposed before. What if the tower isn't a signal we picked up, but one that picked us? Not a broadcast, a beacon, a signal looking for receivers, sent long ago from somewhere or something, that needed minds like ours to anchor into. Human minds. Consciousness that could shape symbols, assign meaning, amplify intention. It didn't matter whether it started in Millbrook, or if Millbrook was simply the first place where someone finally listened long enough. More questions followed. Why bones? Why spirals? Why radios? The answer may lie in how the brain processes sound. Recent studies show that prolonged exposure to low-frequency pulses, especially between 18 and 20 hertz, can trigger hallucinations, emotional disturbances, and even out-of-body experiences. These frequencies affect the amygdala and temporal lobes, the same regions activated by trauma and near-death experiences. In other words, the signal hijacks the most primal parts of us. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensation, in dread, in memory. It builds a place inside the listener's mind, a location that becomes more real the more people imagine it. A psychic architecture, a tower, and now the explorer's footage has been copied, downloaded, shared. Thousands have seen the image. Thousands have heard the hum. It's spreading again, not as sound, but as awareness. Even you, watching this right now, you've seen it too. You've imagined the tower. So ask yourself, have you heard anything strange lately? Whispers and static? Dreams you can't explain? That's how it begins. And the real question isn't what the signal does to us. It's what we're doing for it. In the next and final part of this series, we'll return to where it all started. Millbrook, or what's left of it. Because even after all these years, something's still transmitting. And this time, someone is going to answer. Millbrook is gone. Not officially. On maps, it still exists. A sleepy, unincorporated town in rural America, barely a dot on any satellite view. But if you go there, there's nothing. No signs. No gas stations. No homes. Just a crumbling road that eventually fades into trees that feel wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Like sound itself avoids this place. But we went anyway. 3 of us. Armed with GPS, radiation meters, EMF detectors, and an original recording of the Millbrook broadcast, burned to a CD just in case. We didn't plan to play it, only to have it, like an offering, if we needed it. And what we found confirmed everything. The road in was overgrown, almost deliberately concealed by brush and fallen timber. As we pushed further, we began to lose signal. Not just cellular, but internal. GPS stuttered. Clocks desynced. Our cameras would lose power for a few seconds at a time and then flicker back on. Never when we noticed, only when we reviewed footage. At 3:33 p.m., the EMF meter spiked. A strong pulse, like we'd stepped through an invisible boundary. The woods didn't change visually, but they felt thinner, like the space between things had stretched. And then, finally, we saw it. Not the town, not what was left of it, but a tower, exactly like the descriptions. Black, silent, no wires, no visible foundation. It didn't rise, it loomed. Too tall to measure, too sharp to be old. Its surface shimmered faintly, like it was being seen through heat. And then the hum began. Low, slow, familiar. The same sound from the Millbrook tape. The one that triggered seizures, dreams, visions. The one that supposedly wasn't real. It was real. And it was alive. One of us stepped forward, Jake, our tech lead. He took a few careful steps toward the base of the structure, then paused. I feel like I'm hearing my own thoughts out loud, he said, but they're not mine. He reached into his pack and pulled out the CD. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask. He just placed it on the ground at the base of the tower and backed away. The hum intensified, then stopped. Dead silence. And then, for the first time in the entire investigation, the tower spoke. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was a vibration, a pattern, one that each of us somehow understood, not with language, but recognition, like remembering a nightmare you never had. The message was simple and terrifying. Thank you for carrying me. The broadcast hadn't just reached Millbrook. It hadn't just entered the radios. It had entered the people, their memories, their dreams, their words. And every time the story was told, the recording played, the frequency analyzed, it traveled further. It wasn't just a signal. It was a parasite. And we'd been helping it replicate. We left immediately. We don't remember the hike out. None of us. It's a blank. The next footage on the camera is us back in the car, 17 miles away, with no idea how we got there. But we were all thinking the same thing. It let us leave, because now we were part of it. And if you've watched this far, you are too. Let's be clear. This isn't a hoax. It's not an ARG. It's not an experiment. Every name, every document, every recording we've referenced is traceable if you know where to look. The Millbrook broadcast was real. The tower exists, Maybe not in our dimension fully, but somewhere close enough to reach into ours. And the more people who know about it, the more stable it becomes, the clearer it gets. You've imagined it now. The shape, the sound, the spiral. That's how it grows. There's one more thing. A few days after we left the site, Jake went missing. No signs of a break-in, no messages, no phone activity. But on his bed, neatly laid out, were his boots, his jacket, and an old radio, still powered on. It was tuned to static. But in the background, just barely audible, was a familiar voice, his, saying only one thing over and over: "Come home." If you felt anything while watching this series, chills, unease, a sense that something is behind you, you're not alone. Others are feeling it too, because the signal is awake now. It's not on tape, not on towers, not in the air. It's in us. So this is the final message, the last entry. If you've heard the sound, if you've seen the tower in your dreams, if radios in your home start whispering when no one is near, don't answer, don't follow it, don't go home, stay awake, stay moving. And whatever you do, don't listen again.